The door burst open before the servant could even announce her, and Evelina Ashworth found herself face to face with a man she had never met, his eyes wild with panic that did not match his fine coat and polished boots. He was Duke Alastair Ravensworth, though she did not know that yet, and he did not waste a single second on introductions. "I must marry by tomorrow," he said, his voice sharp and urgent, as if the words themselves were burning his tongue. "Or I lose everything my family has ever owned." Evelina blinked, still holding the parcel of fabric she had come to deliver to the estate. She had expected to hand it to a housekeeper and leave. Instead, she was standing in a grand study, staring at a man twice her rank, who looked at her not as a seamstress but as a solution. He explained quickly, packing as he spoke. His grandfather's will was strict and cruel in its timing. If he did not marry before the stroke of midnight tomorrow, the entire estate, the land, the tenants who depended on it, all of it would pass to his cousin Edmund Vane, a man known for cruelty dressed up as charm. Alastair had no bride waiting, no arrangement in place, only a deadline closing in like a trap. "You argued with my steward for 20 minutes over 3 shillings, he said, studying her. "You did not back down once. I need someone who does not bend. Marry me, in name only. 1 year, I will pay whatever debts your family carries." For a moment, Evelina said nothing. The offer was absurd, reckless, the kind of thing that ruined lives in whispered stories told at market stalls. Her family's shop was drowning in debt. Her younger sister Margaret had not eaten a proper meal in days, and here was a stranger offering to erase all of it with a signature. She could refuse and walk back into the life she already knew, a life of counting coins and mending torn hems until her fingers bled. Or she could gamble everything on a man she had known for less than 10 minutes. Evelina set the parcel down slowly on his desk, buying herself a breath of time. She looked at him, really looked past the desperation and the fine clothes, searching for whether this was a trick or a lifeline. "Then I have conditions," she said finally, lifting her chin. Alastair's eyebrows rose. He had expected tears or refusal or perhaps blind gratitude. He had not expected negotiation. "Conditions," he repeated, as though testing the word. "You are asking me to hand you my name, my reputation, and my future," Evelina said. "You will not get that for free, Your Grace, no matter how many hours remain on your clock." Outside, the estate clock began to chime, counting down a deadline neither of them could stop. Alastair glanced at it, then back at her, and for the first time since she had entered the room, something like respect flickered across his face. "Name your terms," he said, quickly. Evelina took a breath, steadying herself for whatever came next, because she understood now that this single choice would change the entire shape of her life. She was not offering him surrender. She was offering him a negotiation, and she intended to win it. The seamstress and the desperate Duke stood there, the fire crackling behind them, the clock ticking louder with every passing second, both of them fully aware that tomorrow would arrive whether they were ready for it or not. Evelina folded her hands in front of her, calm now despite the pounding in her chest, and began to speak. First, her family's debts would be cleared before the ink dried on any marriage paper, not after. Second, she would have her own private allowance, money that belonged to her alone, answerable to no one. Third, she would have her own bedroom with a lock on the door that only she controlled. And fourth, at the end of 1 year, she would walk away free, with no scandal attached to her name, no matter what the gossips of the county decided to say. Alastair listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly at the mention of the locked door, though he said nothing about it. When she finished, silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking clock and the distant sound of servants moving through the halls, unaware that the future of the estate was being decided in this very room. "You drive a hard bargain for a woman who arrived here to deliver curtains," he said at last, and there was the faintest trace of dry humor in his voice, though his eyes remained guarded. "You are the one who barged in demanding a wife by morning," Evelina replied. "I am simply making sure I am not the only one giving something up." He studied her for a long moment, weighing her words the way a merchant weighs coins, testing for weakness or trickery. Finding none, he nodded once, sharp and final. "Agreed," he said, "but I have one condition of my own." Evelina raised an eyebrow, waiting. "In public, you play the part completely," he said. "My cousin Edmund is already circling like a vulture, waiting for any crack he can use to prove this marriage is false. If he suspects for even a moment that this is not real, he will drag both of us through a scandal that will ruin your family far worse than any debt ever could." Evelina considered this. It was a reasonable demand, given what he had already offered her, though the thought of performing affection for a stranger in front of an entire county left an uneasy twist in her stomach. "Agreed," she said, "but only in public, nowhere else." He extended his hand, and she hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it, sealing the strangest arrangement either of them had ever entered into. That evening, word spread through the estate faster than fire through dry hay. Servants whispered in corridors, exchanging glances of disbelief that the Duke, always so composed and unreachable, had chosen a seamstress from the village as his bride. Some called it madness, others called it desperation. None of them knew the truth, that it was simply a contract disguised as a wedding. Back at the small shop that had been Evelina's entire world, her sister Margaret paced anxiously by the window, waiting for her return. When Evelina finally arrived and explained everything in a low, steady voice, Margaret's face drained of color. "You cannot be serious," Margaret said, gripping her sister's hands. "You do not know this man. What if he is cruel? What if this ruins you?" "I know," Evelina admitted quietly. "But if I do nothing, we lose the shop within the month, and then what becomes of us?" Margaret had no answer to that. Outside, the night deepened, carrying with it the weight of tomorrow's ceremony, a wedding built not on love, but on necessity, and neither sister could shake the feeling that nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. The wedding took place the next morning in a small stone chapel at the edge of the estate, hurried and quiet. With only a handful of witnesses standing in for a celebration that should have taken months to prepare. The vicar stumbled slightly over the unfamiliar rush of it all, glancing between the composed Duke and the steady-eyed bride, who showed no sign of the fear twisting inside her. When the final words were spoken and the paper was signed, Evelina became Duchess Ravensworth in the span of a single breath, and just like that, her old life ended. She moved into the estate that same day, trading her small shared room above the shop for a wing of the house larger than the entire street she had grown up on. The grandeur should have felt like triumph, yet it only deepened the strange hollow feeling settling in her chest, the sense of stepping into a life that did not truly belong to her. Alastair remained distant in the days that followed, colder than his desperate plea in the study had suggested he could be. He spoke little over meals, retreated often to his study, and carried himself like a man still grieving something he refused to name aloud. Evelina, however, was not the type to be silenced by cold rooms or closed doors. She pushed back against his solitude with sharp questions and blunt observations, refusing to be dismissed simply because of his title. One afternoon, she discovered him in the estate's back office, quietly settling an old debt for a tenant family who had fallen behind after a harsh winter. He instructed the steward to keep his name out of the transaction entirely, insisting the family believe the debt had simply been forgiven by chance. Evelina said nothing at the time, but the image stayed with her, a private crack in his guarded exterior that revealed a kindness he clearly did not want anyone to witness. Then came Edmund Vane. He arrived uninvited on a gray afternoon, dressed impeccably, smiling in a way that never quite reached his eyes. He complimented the estate, complimented Evelina's dress, and asked pointed questions about how quickly the wedding had come together, each remark laced with quiet suspicion. Evelina answered smoothly, playing her part exactly as promised, though she felt his gaze lingering on her a moment too long, searching for cracks in a story he already doubted. That night, alone in her locked room, Evelina realized the real danger was only beginning, and that surviving this arrangement would take far more than clever conditions and a signed paper. Edmund Vane did not leave after his first visit. Instead, he lingered in the county, attending every gathering the Ravensworth household could not avoid, always watching, always asking questions dressed up as polite conversation. He had hired someone to dig quietly into Evelina's past, and within days, he uncovered exactly what he was searching for, proof that the marriage had been arranged in desperate haste, with money changing hands before any real courtship had occurred. Armed with this, Edmund threatened to bring the matter before the estate's solicitors, claiming the marriage was a fraud designed purely to dodge the terms of the will. If he succeeded, the inheritance clause would be voided, and everything, the land, the house, the tenants' futures, would fall directly into his hands. Evelina heard the threat secondhand, through a nervous maid who had overheard Edmund boasting to a companion in the garden. Panic rose in her chest, sharp and immediate. If the truth came out publicly, it would not only cost Alastair the estate, it would drag her family's name through scandals so thick they might never recover, debts or no debts. She began quietly preparing to leave, believing that if she disappeared before the accusation became public, she could spare both families the disgrace. She packed only what she had arrived with, refusing to take anything that belonged to a life she now believed she had no right to keep. Alastair found her in the hallway, a small bag in her hand, and for the first time since their wedding day, his composed mask cracked entirely. "Where are you going?" he demanded, stepping in front of her. "Away," she said, "before Edmund destroys both of us. I will not let my family's name be the excuse he uses to take everything from you." "Stop," Alastair said, and something in his voice made her freeze. "This stopped being only a contract for me weeks ago. I do not want you to leave." Evelina stared at him, searching his face for the calculation she expected, the trick, the convenient timing. She found none, only exhaustion and something far more vulnerable than she had ever seen from him. That weekend, a formal ball was held at a neighboring estate, and Edmund arrived ready to strike, hinting loudly to other guests that the Ravensworth marriage would not survive close inspection. Alastair and Evelina stood together, matching his insinuations with calm, unified answers, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Later, cornered briefly on a quiet balcony, Alastair admitted quietly that whatever began as necessity had shifted into something he was no longer willing to lose. And Evelina, trembling from more than just the cold night air, admitted she felt exactly the same. Edmund's scheme collapsed within days. Once Alastair's solicitor uncovered that several of the letters Edmund had used as evidence were forged, hastily constructed lies meant to manufacture a scandal where none truly existed. Faced with exposure and the threat of his own reputation crumbling, Edmund quietly withdrew from the county altogether, his ambitions buried under the weight of his own dishonesty. With the threat gone, the estate was finally secure, and so, technically, was the marriage. Yet the original agreement still loomed over them both, a single year, now drawing closer to its end, after which Evelina had every right to walk away exactly as promised. Neither of them spoke of the deadline directly in the weeks that followed. Instead, something quieter grew between them, small moments neither had planned for. Alastair began seeking her opinion on matters of the estate, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely valued her judgment. Evelina found herself lingering longer at dinner, no longer retreating quickly to her locked room, no longer needing the lock at all. On the exact anniversary of their wedding, Alastair asked her to meet him in the same study where their strange arrangement had first begun. The fire crackled just as it had that very first night, and for a moment, Evelina felt the weight of the past year settle around her. The fear, the negotiation, the slow unraveling of walls neither of them had meant to build. "The year is over," Alistair said quietly. "You are free to leave exactly as we agreed." Evelina waited, watching him carefully. "But I am asking you to stay," he continued. "Not because of the will, not because of the estate, and not because of any condition either of us listed that first night. I am asking because I want a real marriage. With you if you will still have me." Evelina felt her throat tighten, the walls she had built out of necessity finally giving way completely. She thought of the frightened girl who had walked into this house with nothing but a parcel of fabric and a desperate need to save her family, and how far she had traveled since then, not just in title, but in heart. "I will stay," she said, "but I still have one condition." A flicker of amusement crossed his face, the ghost of that very first negotiation returning between them. "Of course you do," he said. "Tell me." "From now on," Evelina said, "we decide everything together. No more contracts. No more hidden kindness settled quietly behind closed doors. Just us, choosing each other honestly every single day." Alistair agreed without hesitation, and weeks later, in a small private ceremony far quieter than their first rushed wedding, they exchanged vows again, this time freely, without deadlines, without desperation, without conditions born from fear. The estate that had once nearly torn them apart now stood as a quiet witness to something neither of them had expected to find within its walls, a marriage that had begun as a bargain and ended as a choice, made willingly, by two people who had finally chosen each other.